Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Speaking Sessions podcast. I am Philip Sessions, your public speaking coach, and I have Kirstin Smith here. She believes good health and fitness isn't just about diet and exercise, it's about becoming 1% better each day. Really like that. This approach has allowed her to help busy women and moms achieve their goals and regain the self-confidence they haven't felt for years. Nowadays, you'll find her leading homeschool lessons from the kitchen table or taking the whole family of 4 kids, crazy life over there, on the road in an RV, even crazier, for adventures, all while coaching, serving clients, and encouraging them to become the best version of themselves. Kirstin's mission in life is to help as many women as possible reach their full potential, increase their self-confidence, and live a life they truly love. And we're definitely going to dive into some of that. We're going to be diving into imposter syndrome today. And I guess we need to talk more about how to speak properly as well, as always, that we do here on the podcast. But Kirstin, I'm glad to have you here. Tell us a little bit more about yourself. Give us a little bit of that personal background that I didn't dive into too much.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. Um, let's see, personal background. I am Kentucky girl, born and raised. Um, Came to Texas about 15 years ago now. My now husband and I moved down here so I could work on a PhD at Rice University. So I actually got recruited, kind of like I didn't realize that they did this for PhD students, but they kind of recruited me like I was a college football player or something to get me to commit to school. I didn't know they did that for nerds,
Oh,
but
wow.
apparently, so that was pretty cool. Um, so I spent about 10 years in higher education, and I specialized in Arabic and Islamic studies, totally different than what I do now. Um, and, eventually ended up quitting shortly after my first child was born. So, like you said, we've got 4 kids that are 3 to 10 right now. So we kind of stair stepped them every 2 years. And I had a period of time where we opened a small gym here in Houston, and I was having babies left and right, and went through kind of a rough patch where my life was really repetitive on a day-to-day basis. I was struggling with a lot of body image stuff. I felt the pressure to look like somebody who owned a gym, right? Be fit, be thin. And I didn't feel like I looked like that. So I was working out really hard and just not really seeing a lot of results. And then, with each pregnancy and postpartum stretch of time, I'd have 10 pounds extra, and then I'd have the next baby and there would be 10 pounds extra. So I struggled with that one for a while and kind of lost who I was, probably being a young mom, being married to an entrepreneur. Um, Thought of myself as kind of just the stay-at-home mom, even when I was working on our businesses. After the gym, we got into real estate investment as well. I handled a lot of that from home, but realistically just kind of forgot who I was, forgot how to set goals for myself. And over the last few years, it's kind of been just a personal journey for me to figure out, out of all of these hats that I wear on a daily basis, like there's a hat that says Kirsten that I didn't put on for a really long time. So kind of getting back to that, figuring out how to feel good in my skin, figuring out how to feel confident, how to really actively create the life I'm living rather than just kind of passively living a life that's kind of been predetermined for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's been the ride I'm on, still on it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure with those kids, I know we have the 1-year-old right now, and that's crazy enough. And it's funny but not funny. You mentioned about not wearing your own hat and everything, and I've definitely seen that with my wife with having the baby.
Hard.
The Yeah, it's definitely tough, and totally appreciate all that she does. But it's funny, this morning actually, she was telling me, she's like, "Oh, I got to be to work at 6:30." She told me that last night, And then I was like getting close to 6:30. I'm like, she hasn't left yet. It's kind of weird. I'm like, I don't know, but it's kind of helpful because I still have a couple things I need to finish, like getting myself ready, and then I'll take over getting our daughter ready for daycare. And I guess it was getting close to time that she should have been getting ready. It wasn't close to 6:30. Anyways, and then we were talking tonight at dinner, and I'm like, I thought she'd be at work 6:30. She's like, I just said that so I could have some me time because I'd have to be in until 8:30. And I'm like, how dare you not take care of your child? Like, of course, joking around, but it's
That's smart,
it's
man.
true because I mean, she doesn't take that time. I told her like, you need to take that time because I definitely do that with the business and everything, where she tends to not do that. So that's something I need to work on as well. And I actually need to go back and acknowledge her for that, so she feels less guilty about trying to take that time to lay in bed, lounge around, or she wanted to sleep in, but she didn't really sleep in. So I need to definitely acknowledge that, because that's a tough thing for, especially, I would say, women when it comes to having kids. They feel like they have to be that caretaker, and they're definitely more nurturing naturally than a man is, for
Yeah.
sure. So there's definitely those dynamics. So I appreciate you sharing that. And not that that's the purpose of where we're trying to go with this, but I just thought of that and wanted to bring that up real quick. But before we dive into what we're going to really talk about today, I wanted to ask you, how did you get over that fear of public speaking?
Oh, I didn't. Not
So
even
what do you do? Well, so
lightly.
you're not over it.
Um,
So what are you doing then? Because I know you're getting on stages. So what are you doing to get
I
past
am.
it?
I'm just embracing the fear. So
Awesome.
one thing that I've realized, I think, with a little bit of time and a little bit of experience, is, like, it's cliche, but that expression, that fear is just fantasized experience appearing real, right?
Hmm.
It's like, what's the worst thing that could happen? If public speaking is the most common fear for adults, what's the worst thing that can happen when you're public speaking, right? Like, you trip over your words, you say the wrong thing, you sound kind of stupid, you literally trip, you fall on your face in front of people, they point and laugh at you, but you're not going to die,
Yeah.
right? Like, when you actually think about what is the worst case scenario, what are you afraid of actually happening? Then it doesn't have to be that scary when you put it into perspective like that, right? It can be
Hmm.
intimidating, but it's usually a really good sign. So I've worked to kind of shift my mindset. The things that I find intimidating or things that I find really scary, usually that's a signal to me that, like, I need to go do it, right? Like, the idea of public speaking to a group of people who are, they're giving you, their time and their energy, and that's a huge honor to be able to take that position in front of people and have, 45 minutes, an hour of their time, and the goal is that you can provide them some value, right? Something that's going to positively impact them so that they can walk away and you've made their life marginally better,
Hmm.
right? Whatever your message is that you have to share, even if it's intimidating, that means that you're taking it seriously, right? That there is a big honor, there is a big responsibility there that shouldn't necessarily go away, in my opinion, right? It should always be something that has that level of gravitas. And for me, when I do stuff, when I get that, like, feeling like, oh shit, why did I agree to this? Right? Like, right before I do something, happens all the time. That is my signal that I'm about to step way outside of my comfort zone. But that's every opportunity for growth. Like, it never exists in your comfort zone, right? You're never
Hmm.
going to grow and expand and become a better version of yourself if you just stay comfortable. So every time I get that, like, heart sinking feeling of, oh God, I committed to do something or I don't want to do it, then I'm like, oh, that's the sign. Go do it.
Yeah. And every time I get that feeling too, I'm like, this is something that's going to actually help me. This is
Mhm.
something that's really going to benefit me, versus staying really, it comes back to that comfort zone, like you're talking about. If it's something that I'm afraid of, I need to do it. And so I try
Exactly.
and psych myself up to do that, especially having tough conversations. That's one thing that I have trouble with, having tough conversations with people that I need to speak with about things that I don't want to talk about. And a lot of those do end up being with my wife. There's conversations we have to have that it's hard to have, but I know I need to have it. Same thing with talking with the boss. You have to have those conversations at times, and if you get that gut feeling, it means you need to do it, because that's something that's going to help push you forward for
Yeah.
sure. And I like that you just take that fear and you just run with it. You don't worry about letting it hold you back, because you're exactly right. You're not going to die on stage, at least not from the actual speaking part.
No.
There could
You
be
can have a
something.
random heart attack or something like that. Maybe it's happened.
Exactly. Exactly. But most people, I haven't heard anybody that actually literally died from speaking. So you're definitely going to be safe by just going in and doing that. Now, tell me a little bit. You've been on several stages. Tell us about the stages that you've been on. Just kind of curious to see, because I know they've been different kinds of stages, some by yourself, some in panels, but tell us a little bit about those.
So I've been really fortunate. I'm a big believer that, I mean, like I said, I joke around that I was a major nerd, right? I mean, I spent
Hmm.
10 years in academia, um, but I am very much like a lifelong learner.
Hmm.
So I'm a big believer in coaching and being in rooms with people that are going to challenge you, right? So that's how you and I are connected. It's through a
Yeah.
mastermind that we're both in. So fortunately for me, being involved with that group and the level that I'm involved at, I've had opportunities to, I guess, kind of dip my toe in the water early on.
Hmm.
Um, and because I've got, 10, 11 years in the health and fitness industry and my own personal stuff, that was an easy way for me to come on as sort of a subject matter expert. We have monthly fly-ins where people come, members come from all over the country, first Friday of the month, and there's usually a theme each month. January is always going to be kind of a health and fitness themed meetup. Everyone's real jazzed about their goals for the upcoming year. Everyone's got some New Year's resolutions. And, who knows, maybe by the first week of the month, they're already all shot to hell. So, at least for a lot of people, that's how it works.
Yep, it sure is.
Yes, unfortunately, I like to avoid the gym the first week of January and then go back second week of January. Um, but that was a really good introduction, right? And being on a panel with other subject matter experts, it's good and bad, because it's good in the sense that the spotlight isn't just on you, right? But if you do suffer, like we all do, from some level of imposter syndrome, you got to know your stuff. You've got to have some level of confidence so that you're not too meek and mild if you're sharing a panel, right? It's that balance. You got to know where your strengths are versus the other panel members, so you know when to add in and kind of when to back off and let somebody else answer the questions or weigh in, things like that. Um, but for me, it was a really good way of kind of getting up on stage and speaking in front of a crowd, being able to convey a certain message, formulate my thoughts in a semi-coherent way, and not feel like, there's so much pressure and so much preparation, and be able to just kind of go with the flow a little bit more, right? A little bit more casual.
Hmm.
So that's worked really well. Um, so being able to do a few of those, I was then invited to lead a panel, which was an entirely different experience, but a really, really cool one. So we had a $1 million mastermind in June in Frisco, Texas, and there were about 3,000 people in attendance.
Wow.
And I got a message one day from the events coordinator, and he said, "Hey, do you want to do this breakout session? I want you to do something on lifestyle design, because it's something I speak to a lot, wrote about it in my book, very passionate about designing the life that you want to live." And so I'm like, "Yeah, this will be great. Is this some kind of a breakout session or something?" He says, "No, this is like on the main stage." I'm like, "Main stage? Like 3,000 people on the main stage?" He says, "Yeah." So, I mean, I got this picture of like me on a jumbotron, and there's like the laser show. Never in a million years did I think that that would happen, right? I was terrified, absolutely terrified. Um, but I had some great people on my panel to talk about lifestyle design, like Steve Weatherford and Rob Bailey, just really, really cool people. So being able to get accustomed to that gave me some opportunities to get invited to speak solo. Actually, develop a topic, figure out what I wanted to share to the audience, and have my own kind of hour-long block to speak. So for me personally, that was a really good way to kind of warm up to the idea of being, all eyes on you for that extended period of time. Because, like I said, it can be really intimidating to jump right into that.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And that's really interesting that you kind of were I don't want to call it you weren't the main person on the panel and then became the main person on the panel. And then all of a sudden you were just the person on the stage, just alone. It is funny how you kind of made this gradual transition to being more and more that center person.
I mean, I said I leaned into fear, but I leaned slowly.
Yeah. Hey, it happens either way. That's pretty cool. I've never actually been on a panel myself, so I definitely want to ask questions about that. So let's go back to that first part. So you're just on the panel. You're not the lead person on the panel. All right, let's just talk about the difference between being the lead panel person and then the person that's just kind of in the panel. What's the differences between that?
So, what was really challenging for me was being the actual moderator on a panel, because there was this back and forth kind of on the fly um, moderating aspect that's really difficult to kind of ad lib, especially if they're people that you're not super familiar with. I mean, luckily, I had a close girlfriend that was on the panel. I can talk to her back and forth all day long, but there were people that I just met for the first time an hour earlier backstage. So while I was familiar with their work, we didn't have that kind of like that witty back and forth, or the ability to play off one another. I couldn't. It's a lot more challenging to kind of come up with follow-up questions for them. And I had things prepared, but it's just when you are speaking on a panel to something that you are a subject matter expert on your field, something that you could actually talk about in front of a group of people, say something fairly intelligent, provide some value. There's a little bit of ease that comes along with that, right? Because you're in your element. It's a little bit more of that while you're doing something uncomfortable that's out of your comfort zone. You're still in your comfort zone and your zone of genius.
So what I'm kind of hearing here is that when you're just on the panel, that you're able to be in your zone of genius while it's still kind of like a live interview and you're answering questions off the cuff. You pretty much know what you're talking about. So you don't really have to be prepared because you've kind of prepared for a long time to speak about that. But when you're that moderator, that lead panel person, it's still off the cuff, but now you're leading that interview, but then you're also asking questions or trying to dig in deeper to people that you have no clue what their industry really is, perhaps.
Right.
You know what I'm hearing? Okay, yeah, that would definitely be challenging. As I equate that a lot to a podcast. Essentially, obviously, it's just us two here, but here I am leading this podcast, asking you questions, digging deeper. But we're talking about public speaking. We're not talking about something completely different that I'm going to have no clue about to try and ask questions. So that definitely would be a big challenge there.
And I'll add, on top of that, I had to manage the clock, which is probably the most intimidating part of it, right? Because everything was scheduled to a T for this 3-day event. So I had to have like little secret signals with people. If they went too long in their answers, I had to monitor their time to cut them off. My little back and forths or my segues in between each person, those couldn't take too long. So everything had to be very well timed, which I will say definitely added to the pressure and the stress of the situation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that I didn't even think about that. That's pretty crazy. Definitely secret hand signals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But then also that transition, that yeah, cut it out. It's like, if it's really bad, you definitely gonna have to do that one, or just completely, okay, I'm taking over the mic kind of thing. But that would definitely be a challenge right there. So that's really cool that you're able to do that, especially in front of 3,000 people. But really just having that segue as well, that's something that takes a lot of practice to do. And I bet probably from raising 4 kids, you kind of get used to that because they're just saying just random stuff. And you're like, all right, cool. Especially homeschooling them. So it's they go off of this random tangent. You're like, cool. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to catch it. We're going to acknowledge it. And we're going to bring it back into the lesson. So you're an expert because of that. You do it with 4-year-olds. And now you're doing it with like 40-year-olds.
In an audience. They were actually listening to me. My 4 kids don't listen to me, so.
But
Straight
so
up.
you had perfect practice. You're definitely an expert at leading panels. Now that you went up there and did it on stage, I mean that was nothing. That was like minor leagues.
Right,
No,
right.
that is really exciting. But I know we talked a little bit offline about this, and this is where I really want us to dive into. These are people, so it's already intimidating that you're trying to lead a conversation and dig out information from people that you have no clue about their industry. But you're also on this panel, and when you weren't leading the panel specifically, you're on this panel with people that are crazy successful in their own right. How did you overcome that imposter syndrome, really? Because that's not only just a fear that, am I going to look stupid, am I going to sound like nobody knows? And in this environment, I think people know how successful some of these are versus others, so you kind of had that going for you a little bit. People aren't, I guess maybe they're expecting a little bit more out of one person versus you per se, but probably not. But how did you handle that imposter syndrome? Because I know if I was on that panel, I'd be like, why am I up here? This is crazy. What value am I going to bring? So how did you handle that?
Major imposter syndrome, man. Because I found myself in this situation where I'm now kind of shoulder to shoulder with people that own businesses doing 8 figures a year, right?
Yeah.
Maybe more. And I own a business, but like it doesn't do 8 figures a year, that's for sure. And it's young. And I considered myself just that stay-at-home mom who's changed diapers and making mac and cheese, let's say 4 years ago,
Yeah.
3 years ago. So major head trash is what I brought to the situation. Major head trash. I had all sorts of stories about my value and my worth and my experience. And I let those keep me pretty quiet for a little while because I was so consumed with my own story, right? And that own feeling of being an imposter, of not being worthy. And I had my very first coaching call when I joined executives. And I remember kind of telling the story like, hey, here's where I'm struggling. I don't feel like I fit in here at all because there's all these kick-ass people. And like, I'm just yada, yada, yada. And my coach said to me, do you think that I don't have imposter syndrome when I go there? And I was like,
Mm.
whoa, because I didn't, right?
Yeah.
Like my coach at the time was straight up ass kicker. Like he was really motivated. He was building an incredibly successful business. Like tons of people looked up to him and admired him, still do. And it was shocking to me to hear him admit that like he shows up in this group and he gets imposter syndrome too. He said that never goes away. We all feel like that.
Yeah.
And I really carried that with me because I think about it now when I go to events and some of the people that I look up to that are incredibly successful, they're looking at other people in the room and they're like, God, I wish that I could do that. Right. So and
Mm.
so is really, really good at that. I wish I could nail that. I don't post on social media enough, but like so and so over there always writes really compelling and valuable content. I wish I could put myself out there like they do. Right. Or I wish that I had the follow-up game that so and so has, or I wish that I had the marriage that so and so has. I wish that I wasn't so involved in my business and I could be home with my kids like so and so does. Right. So like we look through this like selective lens of where we feel like our shortcomings are. The things that come easy to us or the lessons that we've learned, we assume come easy or have been learned by those around us. But often that's not the case. So that's kind of what I've tried to lean into. When I feel that sense of imposter syndrome, I try to figure out like, where are my strengths? Right? What kind of value can I bring to these people to make their lives a little bit better and a little bit easier? And, sometimes it's stuff like I was married to an entrepreneur and I was home with kids while he was flying around to all these masterminds and going to these meetups. And I was really resentful because I was like, why do you get to grow and invest in yourself? And I'm at home withering away to nothing. My brain's turning to mush and it's like Groundhog Day every single day. Right? Like I know what it's like to spend a decade in a marriage and be looking at a divorce and have a bunch of young kids. right? To feel jealous of a business, like the business is the other woman, right? This like
Yeah.
mistress that my husband poured all of his time and attention in, and then would come home and be grouchy, and we got the worst of him, right? And you bottle all that stuff up for long enough. Well, long story short, we made it to the other side of that, right? So like we figured out a lot in communication, how to work together. We work together at home all the time. We literally both work from home. Sometimes we're working at the same time from our home on wheels with 4 kids there. We'll spend a month in the RV at a time. We've got to figure out how to make that work. So we've learned a ton of lessons, and those seem to be some of the lessons that people struggle with the most, right? Especially successful entrepreneurs. It's how do you, that mythical work-life balance? How do you achieve that? And what works for me is, number one, leading from a place of authenticity and vulnerability. That like I have to share all the mistakes that I've made. I have to share all my screw ups. My husband has to be willing to share some screw ups so that we can share the lessons learned and help other people not repeat the same screw ups, right? Like let's compress time and make this easier for you so that you don't do all the stupid shit we did, right? Same thing, like now working in health and fitness. Like I made all the mistakes. I did all the yo-yo, like I have to stick to a diet, or I've got to be like 100% compliant. And then if I break it, then it's like, whew, now like the wheels have completely come off. Like, let me take all the mistakes that I've made, compress them, and then teach other people. And everybody has their own unique skill set in that way, right? And there is value that you can provide. So don't get so caught up in the imposter syndrome, because no one else is looking at you thinking that you don't belong there. It's just you thinking it, right? They're all too consumed in their own feelings of I don't belong here.
I was just about to say that too many people they're focused on themselves. They're not worried about you. They're worried about themselves. So remember that first of all. And then secondly, they kind of talked about what we know, what we're an expert in. Other people have no clue about that. They're not an expert like us. So as long as we just speak about what we know, what we're always talking about and doing and have learned so much about, we're going to come off as this person that's ultra smart to them, because they don't know it like we do. Definitely some great tips there. And I want to ask a little bit selfishly, as we all can definitely improve on our relationships. I think this will be helpful for others as well. But this whole dynamic that you talked about, how Jeff was going to all these masterminds, he was doing all himself, the things to develop himself, and kind of leaving you behind. You're just a mom, you're staying at home with the kids kind of thing. How did you have to kind of bridge that gap, if you will, to have the conversation, or how did that conversation kind of finally come to head where y'all actually had that? And then now obviously you're in self-development space as well. How did that come about?
Honestly, it came about out of necessity and like rock bottom, because I didn't know if we were going to stay married.
Yeah.
Full disclosure. I had bottled up a ton of resentment. He had to, for various things. And I think we just found ourselves in a relationship that was not like a level 10 marriage, which we both wanted, but it also wasn't terrible. It was just that muddy middle of like, this could be so much better, but like neither one of us is really thrilled with how things are going. Right. And I think that I reached kind of a level of hopelessness where I felt really trapped, because my thinking was, what am I going to do? Right. I've essentially been an entrepreneur now for years. If we get divorced and I have 4 little kids, what am I going to do for work? How am I going to earn money? Who's going to hire me?
Yeah.
Right. Like, what do I have to show for it? And so I had this kind of sense of panic. And that to me, while it was one of the worst periods to go through, looking back on it was one of the greatest gifts of my life, because I had this realization that I was trying to like control how he was showing up. Right. We have this idea that, moms are always pouring from that cup. Right. And it is very unique to moms. Like, you guys do a better job of taking care of yourselves than moms do. And we're constantly pouring from this empty cup. And I had this idea in my mind that he was going to come home at the end of the day and he was going to refill that cup for me. Right. But he never did. And then I would sit around with this empty cup and I'd be mad at him because he hadn't filled it up for me. But realistically, it was my job to fill my cup. It was my job. It wasn't his job to fill my cup for me. Like, why wasn't I doing any work to fill my own cup? Why was I choosing to live like this? Why was I not kind of taking control and doing what was necessary to create the time and the space for my own well-being? So that to me was a huge mental shift. And I realized that I was treating marriage like 50-50, right? Like I was doing my 50%, and then I was mad that I wasn't seeing him show up 50%. But I had no control over how he was going to show up, right? Like we try to do that all the time. We try to give other people maybe advice, or we think that they should do something in our minds. We can't make them do anything, right? They're just going to behave how they behave. So we're better off not worrying about it, realistically. Yeah. So I realized that my concept of marriage was all wrong too. It's not 50-50, it's 100-100. And that I was putting forth this like 50%. What I needed to do was be 100% happy, healthy, and whole. Right? If I could take care of myself and I could take care of my family and show up for them, I show up more, I guess, I show up stronger for my family when I'm happier, right? When I take time to go to the gym, or to make sure I eat breakfast or lunch instead of going all day without eating because I'm busy. Or if I sit down and I read something, I feel like I'm giving myself some kind of nourishment. I show up better for my family, right? They reap the rewards of that as well. So when I started really going in like 100% in life, instead of just going through the motions all the time, then I started being able to realize how he was showing up in ways that I hadn't been seeing earlier. Right. So I really started taking control of my life. And there was never a conversation like, hey, if you're going to do this, I want to do this. Really, it just was kind of a natural progression of me deciding that I had to be the author of the story. Right. Like I didn't want to just live a life that fate had already written. I was a passive actress, just kind of going through the motions and things. I wanted to actively create it. I wanted to reverse engineer my dream lifestyle, right? Create all the things that I wanted in that vision. And ultimately, I mean, that's just kind of how things worked out. The funny thing is that once I started doing things right personally, my marriage improved, business improved, family relationship improved, my health improved. Like the ripple effects of that, like that one decision, were massive.
Wow, that's amazing. And it is crazy how if we fix ourselves, somehow a lot of other things around us start to get fixed too. And it really comes down a lot of it, I think, to that example that we create from that. But then there's this energy that we give off, and now that we're kind of happy with ourselves, we're actually trying to do something. When people are seeing progress in us, I've noticed that just in entrepreneurship in general, people are more willing to help you out when you're actually making progress. People want to be around those that are making progress. They don't have to be successful, but as long as they're not a bum and doing nothing, that they want to be around that person.
Yeah,
and
if
then
you're helping yourself.
Yeah. If you're helping yourself, they're willing to help you out. But if you're not helping yourself, it's very hard to help somebody who's not helping themselves.
Yep.
One other thing I noticed within what your story here, and this is something that's happened within my marriage, is there wasn't that communication there. That's the other thing. And that's a strong point you mentioned, that we have to create our own happiness. But the other thing too, and fill our own cup. But the other thing too, you need to ask. And from a guy's perspective, we're oblivious to a lot of this stuff. Say, you wives, you have to go ask your husband to do something. My wife does it sometimes, like, hey, I just need a hug. Yeah, I try and hug her and show her affection. Don't get me wrong. But there's times where I don't know how she's feeling exactly. It's just like, hey, I just need a hug. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm giving you a hug. You needed a hug. Like, let's get in there and get a hug. But you have to communicate that. And that's something that's happened in my marriage. It kind of sounds like from what was going on earlier in your marriage with the issues, there wasn't that communication. You could have been like, Jeff, dude, I need you to give me some love. Give me a hug. Like, show me some support here. But it didn't sound like you were doing that. I know you only gave a general synopsis of everything that happened, the whole journey there. But still, there's the lack of communication, especially in relationships, are the downfall to all relationships.
I will say one of the best tools out there is figuring out what your love language is. So like I tell everybody that if you have not, and you don't even have to go read the whole, 5 love language book, you can go to the website, you can take a quiz, then you need to know what your partner's love language is as well. And really think about how you express love, right? Because a lot of the time we express love to each other in different languages. So we don't even hear it because we're speaking different languages. My husband is 110% physical touch. Okay. If I'm standing in the kitchen and he walks through the kitchen, he's going to grab my butt. Like 75 times a day. It will drive me absolutely insane, but there's no stopping that. That's how he expresses love and affection. Okay. My like dead last love language is physical touch. Right. So like we don't jive well there because I've got kids crawling on me all the time and I'm like, I'm touched out. Don't touch me. I express love in acts of service. Right. It's why I like to cook. I like to make sure that our house looks halfway decent. I like to cook a meal for my family. That's my way of like expressing my love and affection for them. Well, they don't care. Right? They don't care that I show them my love and I did their laundry or something. Like their laundry just got done. So just because you're loving somebody a certain way doesn't mean that that's how they receive love. Right? So I think that's a huge, huge tool for couples to really like do the quiz, and don't just do the quiz and be done. Because I made that mistake before where I'm like, oh, here's my love language, here's yours, cool. And then we just went about our day. Like actually think about how in your daily life you are showing the other person love, and how can you actively love them in their love language, right? And in reverse as well, because sometimes I need to be loved in acts of service in order to feel love. Just because you're loving me in your love language doesn't mean that I feel love. I get that you do, but I don't. Yeah. Right? So like you can be two ships passing in the night like that.
Oh yeah, and just going off that example, yeah, Jeff can give you all the physical touch in the world, and you're gonna be like, cool. You're just, even though like he loves you, it still doesn't feel like he loves you because that's not your love language. It's right. It's very similar to almost speaking a foreign language. Essentially, I was like, cool, and I kind of getting what you're saying, but I'm not picking up 100% of it. That's the exact same way love language is. Like I get it, but it doesn't quite make sense for me.
Absolutely.
Definitely that love language. And I love how we dove down this whole random rabbit hole, but I definitely wanted to ask that question. So I appreciate you sharing that. But I do want to go to our last question here. And I appreciate all that you have shared about imposter syndrome, talking about the panels and everything. But I'm curious, what is, if you could only share the one message for the rest of your life, what would that message be?
I gotta say, well, if you follow me on social media, it's usually that taxation is theft. But I really think that it's that kind of individual autonomy, right? It's that idea that this is your life. It's nobody else's life. Figure out what your vision for it is. Figure out what it is you want, like what you truly want. Everyone's got unique gifts, unique experiences, unique traumas, good things that have happened in life that make you uniquely equipped in this world to provide value and to leave a legacy. And figuring out what that is and how that kind of lights you up, makes you feel alive, makes you feel like you're actually truly living instead of just kind of getting by. You have the power to do that. And honestly, it's kind of why I do what I do now, because I love seeing women that are kind of trapped in that mom, wife, like life is kind of blah and hectic lifestyle. really take control and kind of open their eyes to what all really could be possible for them. Right? If somebody loses 30 pounds that they've tried for years to lose and they never thought that they could do it, and now they've done it, they're like, holy shit, what else is out there for me? And I think that's my message, is like, what else could be out there for you? Go get it.
I like that. That is a great message. Definitely resonates with the whole thing we've been talking about, going past that fear, past that imposter syndrome, and just taking life essentially by the horns and doing what it is that you want to do. Fill your own cup up at the end of the day. I love it. But Kirsten, I appreciate all the conversation we've had. It's been a great conversation. I know our audience got a lot of value out of it. If they want to reach out to you, get to know you more, possibly get some coaching done with you, what's the best place for them to reach out to you?
All the socials, man. Facebook.
All of them.
Yep. The Kirstin Smith on Instagram. DMs are always open. Slide in there if you want to connect. And I will definitely get back to you.
Awesome. Well, Kirsten, I appreciate your time so much.
Thank you for having me.